Margaret Bussey, since I had been away for a while. Okay, Margaret.
And more importantly, you're just really jet lagged, right? It's like 12 hours ahead in Vietnam.
Okay, so public comment? Do you have anything you want to say? No, you're good. Please not now. Okay. So I put first on the agenda approval of minutes just because I wanted to make sure that we got through them before we sort of were tired at the end, which seems like it always happens. So Doug has just circulated a couple of sets of minutes. So why don't we all just take a few minutes to read them over, and then we can take a vote on them, or if anyone has any, corrections or amendments or whatever.
Move to approve the minutes of October 14th and November 24th.
All right, all those in favor of approving the minutes of October 14th, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? All right, motion passes.
November 24th as well.
I haven't gotten through them yet. Give me another minute.
This is really lousy TV.
I know, exactly. And you want to do like a song and dance while we're waiting? I got to read.
Margaret, on the first bullet point, on number 2, I pointed out a typographical error to Doug.
Okay.
The ARE has to be removed.
Which one?
November?
Accounts which typically are have been. So look at the first bullet point. We're on the 24th, right?
Oh, yeah, okay. I see, yeah. Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes of November 24th, say aye. 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 Any opposed? Abstentions? You abstained because you weren't here? Okay, so David abstains. Jason and Shuyu, you guys want to abstain too? Just to be consistent, okay. All right, so David and Jason and Shuyu abstain because they weren't here, but the motion passes. Thank you. Okay, so we're ready for Minuteman Tech.
Did you say no?
There's one issue, and I don't think I think it wasn't working well at our meeting last night, and I think the news was hidden.
missed you on Saturday. Feeling better? Where were you? Was what? Yeah.
Does somebody know how to make a big screen?
Oh, you just click on the,
And I don't think. All right. But it's also, I think it helps putting, it's one of the, I'll be your clicker. Okay. Thank you. All right, well, good evening, and this is actually a dry run of probably what will be the presentation for a special town meeting as well as the public information session tomorrow evening. And if you haven't heard enough tonight, you can, oh, excellent. Oh, and it's actually working, thanks. Well, we'll see. You can get a repeat tomorrow evening. So, does it push? It doesn't, it's not bright. I have to do. All right. We had this problem last night. What? What is that? Is that, oh, that's the remote thing. Thanks, Brian.
Is that your other job? To be the backup technician?
Okay. I don't know where, I should just be able to, oh, okay. No, that was the wrong thing.
End of presentation, we can all go home.
All right, that didn't work. So what are the, it should, oh, here, okay. I'm going to complain about this remote control because it often doesn't work along with the cordless microphone, and it really causes inconvenience. But, so this is what I call my roadmap. This is what I'll be covering: who, what is Minuteman, what is the regional agreement, how will the regional agreement change, why now, what is the impact on Acton, recent trends, and finally next steps. So who, what is Minuteman? Established in 1970. It's a regional high school, 60 member towns. Each member town pays an assessment, and the regional agreement is the governing document. A lot of this stuff is going to be basic for you folks. Oh, gosh. Whoops. Okay. And the curriculum is a mix of, conventional academics and then also vocational technical courses. The academic courses do include advanced placement courses, which some people may not realize. And there also are 16 careers, sort of industry-supported coursework. Students have to pass the MCAS exam. 65% of the graduates actually go on to college, which may be something people don't realize, and the other 35% go into careers and get their professional certifications. Yep.
Can I ask you just how those metrics compare with like the other vocational schools?
I think that quality-wise they're similar. I haven't actually looked into it because I'm one person, and I think that we've had questions. This thing is not doing well. Anyhow, but it is something that I would like to actually know a little bit better. And obviously, towns that are looking into withdrawing have to be exploring the alternatives. But there is a website I found that is a company based in New York that compares all kinds of private and public schools across the country, and I was looking at the data on the regional vocational ed schools in Massachusetts and learned some things that were very interesting, including about enrollment sizes and things like that. But generally, the ones I was looking at, which were SPED and Neshoba, had fairly high graduation rates, which is true also of Minuteman. So I think that there is a range in the size of the enrollment. Some of the schools in Massachusetts are 2,000 students. I think Neshoba is smaller. It's sort of in the range of Minuteman, and SPED is I think maybe 1,000. It's a little bit larger. And that's the one I think that Sudbury in particular is exploring, but that makes sense because it's in Marlborough, which is right next door. So
What is a regional agreement? It's a governing document. As I said, it actually came into existence in 1970 along with the regional district. It's been amended 3 times, and the last time, which some people in Acton may recall, involved was in 2014 when our town meeting in any event voted to approve the amendment, but only 9 other towns approved. It required the unanimous approval of 16 towns, so it didn't take effect. No, yeah, we've had a number of meetings. That was last fall. That was different. That had to do with the proposed withdrawal of Wayland from the district. And at that time, Pam and I didn't want to do what we're having to do now, which is to go through a lot of the background. But now there's a reason really to do it, and Wayland is going to have to go through that whole process again, I think, in any event. But the current proposed changes include the ones that Acton voters approved in 2014 and adds to them changes that a group of selectmen representing all of the select boards in the 16 towns agreed upon, working basically November and mostly in December to come to consensus, because otherwise there was a risk that we wouldn't be able to move forward with anything else in the district. The Minuteman School Committee, Pam Norris, our Acton representative, is here, recommended all the changes that the selectmen reps had recommended, and that's how all those changes now have come to the 16-member towns for approval by their special town meetings. And all member towns, all 16, called special town meetings. Arlington just had theirs the other night and voted to approve the proposed amended agreement. That leaves 15 more towns, most of which are having, I think all of which are having their special town meetings, I think, in February, or the bulk of them, with Boxborough, I think, being one of the last toward the end of February. How will the regional agreement change? Okay, 2014 amendments would have adjusted the method for calculating capital and operating assessments. It had been based, I think, on the most recent enrollment, and they decided to, for the sake of reducing volatility, to base it on a 4-year rolling average. The voting on the school committee also will now be weighted, with which AB people are familiar in any event, because that's what we have on the Acton Boxborough School Committee. So a town like Acton, which has a somewhat, it's not an enormous enrollment, but it has a hefty enough enrollment, will have a little more leverage. There's a simpler process for member town withdrawal. That has been sort of an obstacle that has led to a lot of the disagreement among the member towns in the past several years. The capital contribution calculation includes the wealth factor that is used by the state in calculating Chapter 70 education aid. So Acton actually benefits under that because relative to some of the other communities, we aren't as wealthy. And finally, there are some amendments that can be achieved by a less than unanimous member town approval. The crucial ones, like amending the agreement and withdrawals, still require a much more sizable agreement. The 2016 additions, these are the results of the selectmen talking late last year. It reduces the minimum capital cost charge from 5 student minimums to 1 student minimum, and this is more of a consequence for the small enrollment towns, which up to this time have been paying a capital contribution based on a 5-student minimum, regardless of how many students were actually enrolled, and that kind of chafed on them. There's also going to be a requirement for non-member communities to pay an equitable share of capital costs. We are not able to control the tuition that's set by the state, but there's nothing that says a regional district can't compel non-member communities to pay capital. So that is now going to be included in the agreement. And finally, there is, on top of the new sort of simplified process for withdrawing from the district, a special provision for 7 named member towns to consider withdrawal. They had to declare in December, and in order to be included in the text of the amended agreement. And if they actually do withdraw and go through all the hoops and the State Secretary of Education approves the agreement, then they will have no obligation for any debt that is incurred by the district after December 10th of 2015. And you will see why that date is important, because we are anticipating that the district will try to incur debt after December 10th and in the near future. Why now? As some of you at this meeting know, the district has had a lot of disagreement, and it's been almost dysfunctional. And we've been the recipients of some sort of scathing emails from various people who represent other towns, but amendments would, we hope, in years of disagreement among the member towns about governance and other issues, and with a more unified and stable regional district, the district could move forward with some really important new building, the new building project. Furthermore, the Mass State Building Authority will reimburse about 40% of eligible construction costs. That is, I'm sort of flagged that because I want to find out what that exactly means, which would equal about 45 million of the 145 million projected costs. Well, that reimbursement for the state will expire June 30th. Oops, that's the wrong date, it's 2016. So we have to move quickly to take advantage of it. We wouldn't be so pressed for time if I think the member towns had come to terms earlier than this, because this has been under discussion since 2009. And the reason the selectmen had to get involved was because nobody else was able to make progress. So finally, non-member communities are interested in pursuing membership, but they have made it clear to at least the Minuteman administration that they want all the laundry kind of tidied up before they enter into those discussions. Yeah.
That 40%, that would just drop at 31%, correct, after that date?
Yeah. And that's, yeah. And then the other issue is we wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, based on what the Minuteman was saying, 40% of they're assuming of the 144.9 million would be close to, put us in the balance would be 86 million, not like 100 million, which is quite significant. And as far as the building committee is concerned, they're based on eligible costs, they're still close to 40%, maybe 39% of, they've looked at every element in that budget, and it should be close to, instead of 144.9, it'll be more significant savings than $45 million.
Well, the 45 million was in something that I think Pam and I saw. So, I mean, I calculated, 40% of 145 million, and it's a higher number. And I have seen that 89 million or whatever, which is the net that supposedly the district would cover. That's something that, I would like to clear up. There's some little nits that I want to pick before the special town meeting, because there have been some sort of inconsistent numbers floating around. So what is the impact on Acton? First, as I mentioned, because of the weighted voting, it gives Acton a stronger voice on the school committee. It also will reduce Acton's share of capital costs because of the wealth factor that is taken into consideration, at least relative to Acton's current situation. It will preserve access to high-quality vocational technical education for Acton residents, and that's pretty important because a number of the vocational educational schools have waiting lists, and we have a substantial enough population enrolling that it may be that it would be difficult for us to just sort of turn around and enter our students as non-members in some other regional district, or it's possible we'd have to join another district in order to be assured of getting them in. And then the question is, why would you want to do that unless there was really good reason to? I mean, as I said, I think we probably should, for our own information, find out what other schools are providing. But I think that it hasn't been a pressing need up to this point. In any event, the current enrollment Minuteman from Acton, 31 high school students, 2 postgraduates, this is post-high school, and then the junior high students participate in a middle school program that Minuteman sponsors. The cost of it comes out of the Acton-Boxborough budget, and it involves, I think it's a semester, basically hands-on experience in STEM fields. And I think they do it maybe every other day in the one semester. So it's a good experience for kids who are inclined towards STEM fields or aren't, but maybe have a natural ability that they haven't discovered yet. So financial impact on Acton. 16-member towns, the annual cost will be slightly lower than under the current agreement. With 9-member towns, which right now is what we're talking about is the worst-case scenario. If all the 7 towns that are currently exploring withdrawal, which tend to be the smaller enrollment towns, 5 or under students in the school every year, with the exception of Sudbury, which is pursuing withdrawal for, well, very different reasons. For 9-member towns, the annual cost would be slightly higher, by about $50,000 a year. Steve Noon did bring up a question with us saying that if you look at the projections, they are contemplating that with the loss of students from the withdrawing member towns, the gap would be filled by an increase in non-member town students, and that the anticipated revenues from those schools would sort of help to fill in the revenue gap. And assuming you could do that, the numbers would work. But obviously, if that weren't going to happen, if we weren't going to be able to find non-member students to fill in the gap, yeah, the projections might be bleaker. But at this point, my worst-case scenario projections, I'm not going into the bleakest worst-case scenario projections because I honestly don't have time or bandwidth to do that. But the number of withdrawing towns will not be known until the end of February, when all the special town meetings will have occurred. At that point, they won't have withdrawn. It'll be clear that they are going to withdraw. And in the agreement, it makes clear that the actual withdrawal will not be effective until July 2017. And so it'll be status quo until the new agreement becomes final, which requires the approval of the Secretary of Education. It could be soon after all the special town meetings. I don't know when it might be. It could be sometime this year. I assume or hope that it will be sometime this year, but the timing of that is unclear. Little eye candy for you people. This was challenging because, as I've said, I do not think in numbers. I can deal with them, but it's not the way I think. But first of all, you have the current agreement, and then you have the new agreement, and then you have 16 towns and 9 towns. And if you look at the numbers, I mean, basically, yeah, if you have more towns, it's somewhat better numbers than when you have fewer towns, and the numbers under the new agreement are somewhat better than under the old agreement, but there isn't, and these are the same projections that contemplate that any gaps with the withdrawal of 7 towns would be filled in by non-member enrollment. But basically, the numbers aren't really shifting a significant amount here. And this is a projection to fiscal year 20.
This is working.
Okay.
Got it?
Thanks, Brian. Boy, Brian, you are handyman. Anyhow, I just said the numbers here don't really shift a whole lot. This is, of course, contemplating the inclusion of the building-related debt, so it's projecting out to fiscal year '20. And, you know, the hope is obviously that by that time, perhaps fewer than 7 towns will have withdrawn, and 2 will have actually enlisted some new members to change those numbers substantially. They are projections, and they're not etched in stone by any means. They're projections. So
that was the question I was going to ask. Are these numbers assuming 0 additive students from non-member towns?
no, that's what I was saying, is that there's a slew of material on the town website. On the spreadsheets from which I took these numbers included, they talk about projections for a 9-member district and for a 16-member district, and they include a box that talks about, the non-member component. I think that they're contemplating that, they're basically contemplating a 628-student school, which is what the new school would be designed for. That's going to be somewhat smaller, I think, than the current population, but the current school was designed for 900 to 1,200 students, and if it was ever filled, it hasn't been in a long time, and it's just far too big to serve the population of the district members, and so the decision was made to shrink the school. There are some district members who would like it to be smaller, but the state said 600 enrollment is the minimum that they consider to be feasible for that kind of school. So it's 628, and I was not in any of the meetings to discuss why that number, so, but that's where it stands.
Yeah, I could answer it a little bit.
Yeah.
I have that data right here. Is the current enrollment is 673 students as of November, and these projections for fiscal '20 were 628 with 8% growth in in-district students, and then a pretty significant drop-off in out-of-district students. And these are just assumptions that are broadly used throughout all of this. But generally speaking, they have about 8% in-district growth and a pretty significant drop-off in out-of-district growth. And in any case, it's going from 673 students to 628 in fiscal '20. I'm sorry?
From 527 to 628.
At least a handout that I have for November 4th, 2015 has total enrollment at 673.
Okay, and my handout is from Minuteman. Remember, some of us went to this presentation. I have the breakdown for all the schools. The projected enrollment for current method SPED assessment is 527. Acton is 35.
Okay.
Yeah, even in the new school with 628, they're accounting for about 104 students that are going to be non-member town students, but under the new terms of the new agreement. So.
Do you have a sense of what non-member tuition will increase with the capital cost that this project is approved?
What?
I see numbers, the non-member tuition, I see numbers that it would go up $6,000 to $7,000 per student. I guess I'm just wondering, is with the tuition raising, would that be a deterrent for out-of-district students to attend?
I don't know, because as I said, that the non-member tuition is set by the state, and obviously Minuteman and probably other vocational schools are talking with the state about being a little more supportive of vocational schools. I mean, at one point, the state actually lowered the tuition for non-member students, and this was under the current situation where a lot of these, Minuteman wasn't requiring capital contributions, so it really made things worse. It increased the disparity between what non-member students were getting and what their towns were paying for, which, and that was another sort of a big irritant for all the member towns, that they were subsidizing the education of a lot of students whose towns weren't paying the full freight. And, it's not a cheap education to begin with, and then if you have some towns not paying, chipping in a fair share, then it really starts to irk. Some of the sending non-member towns, I think, are like Waltham, I think, is going to probably do something in-house. They're big enough that they can take their students and create a program in Waltham. Not sure about, say, some of the other big towns like Watertown, but there is also a feeling among these large non-member towns that they saved Minuteman at a time when they needed people in the seats. And, well, anyhow, it's been just a very, very difficult period the past several years since Minuteman really started to explore doing something about the school building, because the school building really needed to be fixed. It was going to be hideously expensive to do that, and in the meantime, they were not getting anywhere because people wouldn't agree on what they should even do or spend. So,
Okay, so we've had a couple kind of clarifying questions. Do people have other questions? And I guess one thing we have to decide is if we're going to try to vote to recommend or not recommend the article, if we want to do that tonight, if we want to wait until next Tuesday, if we're going to meet before then. So, anyway, people can voice their opinion on that as well. So, any questions? Steve?
I have a few.
you know, I'm not done yet.
Oh, I thought that was the end.
No.
Oh.
Sorry.
No.
I thought you clicked through that slide and it was done.
No,
Okay.
no. Yeah, sorry, you know, well, I'm a person of words, so no, I'm not prolix. I use just enough words and not too many, but anyhow, I've got to figure out where I am here. Okay. Recent trends, I already did what now? See, this is the problem, is I start talking off the slides and then I lose track of these stupid note sheets. Okay. Now, these I stuck in only because I've gotten some questions from people about the enrollment, it's declining. I also had a question about to what extent SPED students are present in the Minuteman population, because their needs can drive up the cost as well. I do not have information about Acton's SPED students, if any, at Minuteman, because we don't have any information about the current enrollment. I think I don't know if it's a privacy issue or what, but the parents at Minuteman, Minuteman parents are going to get notification across the district that their towns are having special town meeting to vote on the Minuteman regional agreement. So I'm hoping that some of our Acton parents will show up at the meeting and maybe say something about how wonderful the school is. Anyhow, but recent trends, this is something I took from, I think it was last year's preliminary budget presentation. It basically shows the enrollment trend. It was pretty low in 2010, relatively speaking, and then it climbed, and then I don't know what was going on 2013, that it kind of grew to that point, and now it's down. I don't have the numbers for October 2015. That's something we could ask about to fill.
But I think that 500 is just member town enrollment. It doesn't include the non-member for the total school population.
Okay, and then...
Let me continue on that. I would like to look it up.
And then this is just showing the SPED enrollment trend since 2010 to 2014, basically. Well, the enrollment line is the same as the bar chart you just saw, but the SPED enrollment has kind of, well, gradually been climbing up, and as of October 2014, almost half of the students were SPED, which I had heard was something that was unusual about Minuteman. They had a higher proportion of SPED students, which I assume means students with individual education plans. But anyhow, this was just information. I thought some general context information that might be of interest in case people didn't know about it. And then this is my very bare bones Acton Assessment trend, just based on the ALG sheet. Unfortunately, we've eliminated all the back years, so I didn't have very much information to draw on. The percentage increases look, pretty big, although I think that, relatively speaking, sometimes you have to look at the base numbers to see what you're talking about, but that's where we are. And the 1.1 million figure is the one that's been thrown around fairly recently, so. Okay, next steps. If the agreement is approved, and as I said, it means that all 16 towns approve the amendment at their special town meetings this month, next month, and the Secretary of Education also approves it. If that happens, then that might not happen, the approval by the state might not happen before the next step, but sometime before mid-March or by mid-March, the Minuteman School Committee will recommend the financing proposal, often called Module 5, which is the financing proposal for the new building project. And mid-March is the time that was discussed at the most recent breakfast meeting that Minuteman had for district representatives, and it's because some of the member towns have their annual town meetings in May, and so that's intended to capture those, enable them to actually have the financing proposal on their annual town meeting and not have to schedule a separate special town meeting. But once the school committee refers the financing proposal to the member towns have 60 days to vote it down if they don't like it. If you approve it, wait, excuse me?
Is that a special town, or that is a town meeting?
No, it's 60 days, as I said, the idea is to try to enable towns, if they want to take any action at all, to have the item on their annual town meeting warrant, so they don't have to call a special town meeting, because a number of towns, it's not just Acton, are kind of special town meetinged out for various reasons. So the idea is that if you wanted to call, have your town meeting address the financing proposal, then you would have 60 days to, well, at least to oppose, but even if you wanted to sort of have your town have an opportunity to approve it, it's 60 days. If any town meeting votes down the proposal, then the next option, and I think the idea is that all the towns would have an opportunity to vote at their town meetings, and then once all that had happened, then the Minuteman district would initiate a district-wide ballot vote. The administration of the school is already communicating with town clerks of the 16-member towns to start setting up the district-wide ballot vote, because there's a lot of planning that's involved. You have to reserve the date. I think it has to be on the same day, and you have to have the ballots, and there's a cost associated with that. But the district-wide ballot vote requires a majority, which is different from unanimity among the 16 town meetings. As I said, any withdrawing towns, and the withdrawing towns, in addition to voting on the proposed amendment agreement at their special town meetings, are going to have to vote on a proposal to withdraw. If they don't do that, it means that, or if it fails, then they're not withdrawing. So, because that's one of the requirements of one of the hoops that's required to withdraw. So they will remain members in any event, whatever happens, until July 2017. And as I said, they will have no responsibility for any debt incurred after December 10th of this past year. Now, if the agreement isn't approved, and this would most likely be because one of the member towns didn't approve it, it's less likely that it would go to the Secretary of Education and fail there. But the 16 member towns would they would remain members, and they would continue to operate under the existing agreement, which is problematic. And it also generates some uncertainty about the upcoming financing proposal and the vote, because there are some member towns, including Arlington, that said they wanted to have the agreement amended before they voted on the building project, or they wouldn't approve the building project because, well, in Arlington's case, they wanted proportional, the weighted voting, and among other things. So there is the potential loss of the 40% rate state reimbursement for the building costs, which it expires June 30th, 2016. Oh, I have the date there, correct. Not only do we lose that rate reimbursement, but getting back in line is going to take a while. Typically, I understand, I've heard that the state only awards about seven school district sort of financial assistance every year, and there is a long line of, I think, districts that would like help. So Minuteman, if they wanted to try again, would have to go to the back of the line, and who knows how long that would take. In the meantime, they would have to deal with the current building, which is in desperate need of refurbishment and all sorts of things. It's out of date. There's all sorts of things that aren't up to code for which they've been exempt. But if they start to do some substantial repair work, at some point it ends up triggering an obligation to do all of the code work that they currently don't comply with. And of course, this would have to occur while students were in session, which would be disruptive to them. And it would ultimately take more money. There would be no state reimbursement. But we need to pin down the numbers, the latest numbers on what that, because the last numbers that we have for the cost of doing the repair dates back to, I have back to the beginning of last year, at which point it was about $105 million, which is still bigger than the number that Mike said would be the net number that the district would pay for a new building. But I just want to get that straightened out. But in summary, the advantages, what we get if we approve the regional agreement, you strengthen the governance of the regional district, you sort of also stabilize or clarify the regional district membership, because towns that want to get out and have been creating trouble in the district will be able to get out. It also clears the way for the district to move forward with the building project, and with the omission of all these sort of this between town fighting, it may make the regional district more attractive to new members. And finally, Minuteman students from Acton will have a home to go to, which is otherwise not going to be assured. And this is finally a quote there's been a lot of writing in the papers about the jobs that are going to be coming into existence in the next several years, and the fact that a lot of them are going to require vocational technical skills, and we're going to have a shortage potentially of people to fill those spots. Charlie Baker, in his State of the Commonwealth address, announced that he was going to be recommending paying $75 million to assist vocational technical schools in basically with various things. $75 million isn't a lot considering the size of the state, and considering that just what the kind of state assistance that the Minuteman district would be getting for their new building project. But it's still, he just sort of flagged it. It was one of the things that he flagged in his speech. And I thought that was sort of significant, so I threw it in. Questions? Now you can ask questions. Okay, Steve, you were up.
Well, it was certainly worth waiting for. A few questions. First goes to viability of the 9-member district. The assumptions that they're basing their FY20 assessments off of assume an 8% growth year over year in district students. Now, in-district students from withdrawing towns or remaining towns, that enrollment's been declining. Acton itself will see probably a 10% decrease in school-age students over that same period. So the assumptions are based on reversing two trends. The first is that somehow in-district students, say roughly 33% more than today in FY20, will be signing up for Minuteman, but there'll be 10% fewer students in the population. So in business, we'd say, you're assuming your market share is going to increase tremendously. And the second is that the in-district students, even of the 9 remaining towns, that enrollment's been declining over the past few years. So my concern is, if those things don't happen, then we add in out-of-district students. And I've been following this situation for many years, and I've been told on more than one occasion that running Minuteman with a high proportion of out-of-district students is not a good thing. Now, whether we can attract them or not, based on charging them $7,000 or $8,000 in capital, is another thing that I have a great deal of concern about. Yeah, we've been able to fill the school with out-of-district students from a few big towns that may go their own route anyway, or two, they may not find the price that competitive anymore. They have other options that could be done at less of a cost. So I am not at all sure that the assumptions that show even the $50,000 increase are valid. I think if we're in a 9-member group, that number could escalate to $100,000 a year easily or more. So what do we have besides it'll be a nice new school to support the idea that 8% more kids from the in-district towns are going to show up?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, this is all projections and suppositions, and, you know, some of us are, I'm basically actually a glass half full kind of person rather than, or half empty at times and half full, but honestly, I think that one of the things you have to be careful about is looking at the 9-member district and assuming that that's the way Minuteman's going to be forever, making all kinds of assumptions based on a 9-member district, and sort of ignoring the fact that, you know, if we are able to move forward with a new school, that it will be a new school. It just, people like new, and if it's well designed, it is going to offer programs that, and that's what the administration is pitching, and I think that there are a fair number of people who have been involved in this process on select boards in other towns who really feel strongly that this is, that's the way it's, you know, to go, and they're not stupid people either. They're not sort of, you know, kumbaya, let's, you know, all be happy, you know, and be well and all that sort of thing. I think that it's just, you know, how do you project concrete numbers based on things that don't exist, you know, today? I mean, you can say, you can make assumptions based on what does exist and assume that that's the way it's going to go and it's going to keep going downhill and the enrollments are going to decline and you know, the out-of-district towns are either going to keep sending or the district's going to continue to be very dependent or they're going to stop sending and then, you know, Minuteman is going to be decimated. But that's also not a fair assumption. I mean, there's a counter assumption and projection for every sort of...
Did this, when the 7 towns who decided to withdraw, did we think about it? Did we analyze it? Did we look at it? Or did we just say, no, we'll stay?
Well, I think that, you know, first of all, think about it. Some of them announced at the meeting in December that, well, we want to be on that list just in case, you know. Because
so why didn't we do that?
Because it's just, well, because I think that Minuteman has worked for us, and, you know, frankly, we have, you know, 25, 30, I don't know, we're up to 33 students, and, you know, frankly, we want to continue with the school that we have. Yeah, we could explore alternatives, but that's going to be a big undertaking. You know, we would have to form a committee and probably have to get some professional assistance to make sure that we, you know, you know, not to disparage people who are just very intelligent, but I would like somebody who knows something about vocational education to be able to evaluate the schools and not just say, oh yeah, it looks good because the price is lower. You know, and they have sort of similar courses. You know, they have car repair and home economics, and that's good enough for our students, especially because the price is lower. So.
Okay, we can debate. I think we have pretty good educational resources in town over at the school district, but...
No, but I think that it is something, you know, I don't know if anybody in the town ever explored alternatives in the past. You know, I haven't been involved that long in it, and when Nancy Banks was school committee rep, I think that she was probably much more engaged than our school committee reps in the past, and I wasn't aware that, you know, she was looking at alternatives.
No, I'm really talking about, I mean, recently, up till very recently, you know, I thought Boxborough was going to withdraw. I was pretty sure Wayland would withdraw if they had the chance, and it was no big deal. They didn't send any kids to the school anyway. Sudbury was always a question mark, but they had a lot of kids, and it would be hard for them to do. All of a sudden, half of the members are getting out.
But collectively...
And that's what changed very rapidly, and what are they looking at that we're not? What evaluation did they do in December that we didn't? So we're going into another special town meeting when we're basically showing the town members one alternative. You know, here's what we decided to do it. And frankly, I don't like that. Well, I'll move on. But I just wanted to say, the other thing I don't like is the deal. If you and I freely made a deal in 1970, and we're both old enough to have done that, in which we agreed to share
I was of majority age, barely.
as was
Barely.
I, to share costs pretty much in perpetuity for something, and you came to me and said, Steve, I want to get out of that deal we made in 1970, I would say, well, Janet, I'd consider it, but what are you going to give me? What are you going to pay me? Because now I have to absorb your costs. Well, this deal's going the other way. These 7 towns are coming to us and saying, hey, we'd like to get out of this binding agreement we made in 1970, and we're not going to give you anything. In fact, we're going to make you pay more. Doesn't make sense.
I suspect that at some point that idea came up, and I would guess that it didn't get very far because you would not achieve consensus on that. I mean, one of the big issues has been that, there are towns that want to get out, and the towns that are staying are saying, well, wait a minute, we don't want to, we're not sure we want to let you out just that easily. It's a problem, so you end up, it's like a couple that's getting a divorce, and one is holding the other over the barrel. They're each holding each other over the barrel, and then they can't get to the point where they can actually get a divorce, and so they make each other miserable. And I think that it's not that the relations are so bad in the district that it's come to that, but it's close, because basically it's not as bad as, say, as it is on the Hill in Washington, but at some point you want to just break the logjam and move on. And sometimes this is a compromise, and it's not a perfect agreement. There are deficiencies about it, but the enemy of the good is the perfect. And if you keep looking for absolute certainty and perfection, we will never have an agreement, and we will remain in this district until maybe it just crashes, which would be unfortunate, that would be...
We have an agreement. We don't have a revised agreement. Thank you.
So just a couple comments from you, and then we'll go to Jason. One is that, in this logjam, to Steve's point, it sounds like the member towns that didn't want to withdraw lost, And so, and to me, what it sounds like happened is that the district was so eager to try to get the building built, and they knew that that would not happen until a regional agreement could be agreed on that would essentially allow these towns to get out. And so that was really the forcing mechanism, that we have to build this new building. We couldn't make any progress on that unless we got to a new regional agreement. And so, we basically lost, We didn't have any leverage at that point to use. So I think that is unfortunate. I wanted to make a comment about the 8%. When I was at that session that Minuteman did in the fall, that I think a few of us are with, I think my takeaway from it, because I kept probing that and asking where they got that assumption of that 8% growth rate, given the things that Steve has already laid out, is they essentially backed into it. In other words, that's what they sort of came up with in order to support the numbers that they needed. Yeah. So it wasn't based on any sort of, this is what we think we can achieve. It was based on, this is what we have to achieve to support the numbers we need. And that is troubling. And I asked several times those officials if they'd done any kind of outreach to, talk to principals or districts, superintendents of member districts, of non-member districts, to get a sense of their interest. Would they be wanting to send more students or not? And there just hadn't been any of that research done. It sounds like there has, from the reading and from your presentation, it sounds like some communities have indicated that they want to be a part of it. So that's great news. But I don't know how many, and I don't know how big those communities are, and I just don't have any more information about that. It sounds like, maybe nobody wants to say who they are because they don't want to be committed, which I understand. But still, there just seems to be not a lot of rigor behind the assumptions. So to me, the whole thing sounds like we have to build a new building, and so we have to do it, and we're just going to do it and hope for the best. And so, one of the things I was proposing in that meeting is, are there other ways that we can explore providing technical education to students without having a new building? And that was not well received. So anyway, I just think that it's not a good deal for Acton at all. And I do think that I do want to encourage us, I'm certainly, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't say that, but I do want to encourage us to look at the alternatives and see what other options could be for Acton to provide technical education to its students, and what the cost of that would be, and the cost benefit. I think that is worth the rigor. I think now is the time to do it. We won't be able, to easily do it in another time, I think, from what I understand about the regional agreement. There was a whole article about Boxborough, and they've gone through sounds like a fairly rigorous process. They have a 5-member vocational education advisory committee.
That's because they want to get out.
Well, I understand, but the point is they're trying to decide whether
they have 5 students. I mean,
I understand, but they're trying to decide to do it. So I guess my point is that it looks like they've done a lot of research about the other options, and I wonder how much we could piggyback on them in terms of their research, use some of their research to inform our decision.
You can use Sudbury's research as well, and I have a feeling Boxborough is probably piggybacking on Sudbury.
Probably. So there's probably, my point is, there's probably research out there that it wouldn't be that hard to pull together the costs and benefits of remaining in the district and not remaining in the district. And so I would strongly recommend that, because I think this is a big cost increase, and as we evaluate so many other different costs that we have coming down the pike in terms of capital and those other things that we all know about, to me, it's worth it to kind of go through that rigor and really make a robust decision about whether or not this is the right thing for Acton to do.
You realize, Margaret, that if this agreement is disapproved by our town meeting, that's it.
Well, that's
the end of the agreement, and we are going to be stuck with Minuteman. In its current condition, with its old building, and no state reimbursement.
So that was my question.
And there's going to be even less likely that we're going to make any progress with the building or anything else.
So
you're not going to have the option of saying, well.
So I'm actually not recommending that we don't pass the agreement. My question is, if we pass the agreement, can we then still decide whether or not we want to withdraw?
No, you still can, you will still, under the existing agreement, you'll be able to pursue withdrawal. It's just going to be a little more challenging, because until the new agreement is actually effective, and it could go into effect at some point this year, once the Secretary approves it, then you'd be able to take advantage of the somewhat easier withdrawal provisions, which aren't as easy as the ones that the 7 towns are trying to take advantage of, but it's still easier than the current agreement, which is why nobody's withdrawn. It just...
Right. But did you have something, Pam? I know you were...
Just to clarify one thing, that the earliest the new agreement will go into place is July of 2017.
17, yeah.
Goes into effect July of the year after the calendar year.
Is it? Because I know the withdrawal was going to be effective then, but Dan Matthews was saying that technically you could go into effect as soon as the Secretary approved it.
It's not what we've heard. We need to,
there.
I have a couple
So anyway, so those were my comments. So I think Jason was next, and then we'll go to Mike.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions. I'm pretty sure that I know the answers already, but I'm going to ask anyway. Is it your expectation that if there is no modified agreement, would the capital appropriation not be able to meet the low bar of merely a majority town vote? Do you feel that that is untenable as a strategy?
You mean if you go straight to district-wide ballot to vote on the building project, there's a risk. I think that getting a majority vote is easier than getting a unanimous vote in town meeting, but, there is a risk that towns that want to stay in the district but want the amended agreement might not want to go forward with the building project.
And is your expectation that would fail?
I don't have an expectation. It's just a much greater risk that it won't pass.
Okay. If we...
And obviously also, the problem is if you don't approve the regional agreement, then all of these towns that want to get out can't get out.
Which may not necessarily be a problem.
Yeah, but they won't approve if they want to get out, they're not going to approve the building project. See?
So that's why I asked.
Yeah.
So that's, if you
But
count that, that's 97.
I haven't done, yeah.
That's a victory.
I haven't counted the votes yet, so I'm not absolutely sure. I think the selectman from Boxborough thinks that probably there wouldn't be votes to make a district-wide ballot succeed, but I haven't really studied that, so.
Okay. If we remain deadlocked in this agreement, how many years will it be before Minuteman loses its accreditation and the punitive mandatory cost remediation kicks in? Is that 1, 2, 3 years out?
I think that they would have to start, because under what would have happened what happens if they move forward with the building project is that the accreditation, some organization would suspend, they wouldn't kind of try to enforce or suspend the accreditation because the district would be actively trying to make improvements to the condition of the school. But if the new building project didn't move forward, then Minuteman would have to start taking action to do substantial repairs, and in all likelihood, because of this thing that triggers the obligation to do everything, basically, there would be a huge cost.
So the answer is it's immediate?
Excuse me?
The answer is it's immediate?
Yeah, I gather that, yeah, they'd have to start it, and then and it would all be on the district, so.
We're looking at the FY20 projections because that's the year the building is supposed to be open. When is this building supposed to be?
Well, it's supposed to be, they're anticipating September 2020. I think that if the financing got approved, say April, May timeframe, then I think they'd spend about a year on what they call construction management, which is basically getting a lot of the paperwork and plans and all that done. And then I've forgotten, do you know how long they said that the construction would take? Is it a year and a half or 2 years? But yeah, and so the goal is to open September of 2020.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Oh, I'm sorry, it was Mike next, then Doug.
Yeah, with regard to some of your comments, Margaret, that the school, Minuteman is actively building a marketing campaign to get new students. They're sending out surveys to 7th and 8th graders, and they're getting some very positive response for school visits and things like that. And I think when you think about the concept of it, will be a state-of-the-art school that's properly sized, well, at least with room to grow, but it also will have state-of-the-art programs that provide skills that are needed for the future that are really have not been addressed throughout the state. These are, and they have the ability to adapt even new programs that for jobs that really don't even exist today, that will exist sometime in the future. And also remind that all 16 towns have shown positive unanimous support to build this new school building, the $144.9 million facility, because they all acknowledge the need that it has to be done. And there is no strategy, there is no option to do nothing. If you do not build the school, you're going to be stuck with an even bigger bill of maintaining and repairing or replacing bits and pieces of the existing facility. And I think it's really a disservice to the students and to our future. If we don't really address this in a proper way. Yes, it's expensive. It costs money, and it's, it's, but what doesn't in education? Even our own school system is, outrageously expensive, but yet, that's what it costs. There's no, and I know as they're designing the school, that there is no fluff in there. Everything is only put in the plan that they know that the state will reimburse them for. And if the state will reimburse them, will not reimburse for a material or space usage, that gets kicked out. So I think they're working very hard and very diligently, to do something that will attract a lot of students. And I think meeting those educational and population goals will not be a problem. That's my opinion.
Thank you.
I've been sort of loosely following this issue for the last 8 years, and there are times you say, let's blow it up, start all over again, we ought to study this and that and the other thing. The truth of the matter is this is government. Government doesn't do that sort of thing. It's certainly not going to happen in Massachusetts, and it's definitely not going to happen with 16 towns where 6 or 7 of them are trying to bug out and shun their fair share of the long-standing need for capital expenditures in this institution. I think that in the backdrop, and I've said this before and it's worth repeating, the major problem here is that there's been a dismal failure on the part of the Commonwealth to exercise leadership in VOED education and in this school in particular. The fact that we have a mechanism in place which any fool can see is bound to fail at some point and has now done so, and permitted it to unwind over this long period of time in a building with major leaky roofs, athletic fields with water up to the ankles, with systems that were unreliable and in some cases dangerous, and where kids were obviously not in the best situation that they could be in, that we could put them in, to get an appropriate vocational education. So the state remains silent through this entire graceless episode, and here we are. It's time to tear down the old building and build a new building. Some towns are going to want to get out, and they have leverage to use against the rest of us, and they're going to use it. They are using it, and there's really not much we can do about that. There are no alternatives that I'm aware of. I don't know of any VOED charter schools where you can take the kids and drop them off there in a private sector setting. So it has to be done by the state. And there's a lot of records around the landscape, but there's a lot of ingredients too. And so I think this imperfect agreement is about as good as we can do, or as well as we can do. I think that one of the statistics to look at in your chart is that our cost per pupil was around $26,000. I think when we looked at it 3 or 4 years ago, at $26,000 a head. And on the 850,000 number that you've showed us in the last graph, with 33 kids, it's around $26,000 per capita. So I think that's a good sign. Somewhere in there, that's a good sign. But also, it suggests that there's more work to be done in analyzing how those costs are derived if we're going to sweep away the old building, which we've become quite accustomed to blaming for all of our problems as far as Minuteman is concerned. It's been a wonderful, sort of stalking horse. But I think that we're going to have a brand new state-of-the-art facility, and I would look at that as an opportunity to reduce costs. The building ought to be dramatically more efficient. We ought to be able to do an ever so much better job for the kids and reduce costs at the same time. So the fact that the number seems to be remaining the same is something that I would go back to the school administration and say, you need to do some homework here, because that's a glaring problem. I mean, you're going to get your brand new school. Everything's going to be great, and the costs aren't going down. Why? And they need to have some fulsome answers on that point. But bottom line, I don't think that it's too late in the game. We've been at this for years and years and years. The deadline is fast approaching. Let's do it and get it over with. And like Mike says, it's going to be messy, but we brought this on ourselves as 16 communities, and our state didn't help us. So let's muddle our way through and get it done.
Shuyu?
I'm a big supporter of vocational education, and I think that a substantial percentage of college students will be better served by vocational education. Having said that, my support is not unconditional. What I mean by that is we only have limited resources. Right now, Acton spend about $14,000 per pupil, and then but the projected cost for Minuteman education will be about $32,000 to $33,000 per pupil. And if we consider the town withdrawal and the no minimum charges, I wouldn't be surprised if the number goes up to 40,000, especially consider the very optimistic projection of 8% growth. So all I'm saying is that vocational education is great, but at what cost? We only have so much resources. So at some point, I think this thing is from a very positive thing to maybe neutral. At some point, it may not be that great anymore. So everybody probably have a different limit number in your mind. And I don't know what your number is, but if once it's reached 40,000, that seems like very high. The other way to look at it is we spend $145 million. Doesn't matter where the money coming from. For a school of 600, to me that's a little bit much. And I understand it's for educational, they need special equipment, but still, that's a very high number. And given the fact that they have a very high projected growth rate, even Acton withdraw this time, I think if we want to send our pupil back to the school, I think we will be welcome. That's my guess. I don't have any proof or anything like that. And the other thing is that there's another vocational school at the intersection of 495 and 290, I forgot the name. So maybe that could be an alternative. In any event, we are using very pricey real estate to develop vocational school. That doesn't seem like a very shrewd investment to me. So that's all I'm saying. All right, thank you.
Anyone else? So Bob.
Are your numbers, the dollar numbers that you use for Minuteman, do they include the junior high school program?
It's my understanding the junior high program, you mean the enrollment? Or just
No,
the junior high program, I understand, comes out of the AB assessment? Doesn't? I don't know. I thought if it was paid out of AB.
It currently is billed to each town. If Boxborough withdraws, it will then be billed to AB.
AB, okay.
And we'll pay 85% of it.
But my only observation is that the junior high school program is sort of independent of all of the rest of this, because if Minuteman disappeared tomorrow, we could still hire people to teach that particular course, and we would incur those kinds of costs. And it seems to me if you can get those out of the numbers up there, it would be useful. It seems to me on the question of the growth of in-member students, that the model that they used that we heard some months ago when they had a meeting at Minuteman was the field of dreams approach. If we build it, they will come. And they may or they may not. I'm sympathetic, Margaret, to your views about we should look at alternatives, but I read the Sudbury report, I read the Boxborough report, and their alternative is, well, let's send them to Keefe or Assabet. They didn't mention Shawshene, I suppose, because that's too far away. So there are really no other alternatives except to find a cheaper vocational school. And if their students don't get in there, I don't know what they'll do. I mean, Sudbury has about as many students as we do. Assabet and Keefe probably will not take all of them. Will they just leave them in the Lincoln Sudbury schools, or will they send them back to Minuteman? And who knows? I think I will vote to recommend it, but it's a mess, and I just don't see how you get out of it.
Anyone else? I'm thinking, Mike, we should not take a vote now on it, but maybe meet before town meeting? What do you think? I would like to just propose the notion that I'm willing to support the agreement if we can do some kind of analysis about alternatives to, I'm fine to support the agreement because we can still support the agreement and then decide to withdraw if we wanted to, but I guess I would like to see some sort of analysis done. I don't think it has to be something that takes months and months. I think it can be done fairly quickly, but I don't necessarily mean that it needs to be ready for town meeting. I just mean like after town meeting, I think we should do it. So that's my thought. We don't have to talk about that now. We can maybe talk about that on Tuesday if you're okay, Mike, to delay the vote, or what do you think?
Well, I don't know if it'll make a difference, but we could meet just prior to the special town meeting next week.
That's what I'm saying.
I don't know what would have changed, but...
Well, Mr. Chair, if I'd just as soon take the vote tonight. You know, what's going to change? Yeah, I'd like to support the article and say, but let's hold open the possibility of withdrawal. I'm not sure that's a real possibility. As a lot of people said, well, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. You know, well, Doug, maybe the state will actually have to step in and do something if we do vote this down finally. As I've said before, I don't like this deal. I think it's bad for Acton. There's a risk that we are having trouble even getting our arms around if the enrollment doesn't grow. We've got a $140 million school and not a lot of towns to pay for it. So I would be inclined to vote no on this.
I guess my point about delaying is if there were people that were here, that there are people on the FinCom that are interested in supporting what I have proposed, which is if we can get the selectmen to agree to at least look at other alternatives after town meeting to, you know, do a little bit of analysis that we can feel robustly that this is the right decision for us to stay in, then I'm willing to support it. And so I guess my point is, if people want to think about that, or if we want to go back to the Board of Selectmen and ask if they're willing to do that, and then, you know, but if I'm the only one that has that stipulation, then it doesn't matter. But if there are other people that are interested in that, then we could see if the Board of Selectmen are interested in making that kind of agreement before we go into town meeting. So maybe we have to talk about that still, or we can move on. I know we have a lot to cover in this meeting still. No comments? Do people want to?
You know, if you had 10 years and you had scores and scores of people to dedicate to studying the alternatives and so on, that might make some sense, but we're out of time. The resources aren't available to do the kind of comprehensive alternative study that would be needed to offset this thing, to tip it over. And so I think, you know, the jig is up. It's messy, sorry. And the state, if the state comes, if God forbid the state comes in at the last minute, my beef with them is that they should have been in the program all along and should have been lending support at every turn and helping out when things got jammed up, and they didn't do it. So if this collapses and the state has to somehow come in and pick up the pieces, that's a disaster for us. So I don't want to go there. I think it's over. I think we need to vote this thing in. If you need to pinch your nose while you're doing it, then fine. But let's just get it done.
I don't think it's going to take 10 years of analysis. I think you can literally look at what Sudbury's done, look at what Boxborough's done. It probably takes 3 hours to put it together.
And so Sudbury is the most hostile community to the Minuteman School. I mean, Sudbury has people there who have been attempting to undermine this school on a continuous basis for as many years as I've been looking at it. You couldn't pick a worse town to look at as a vector of leadership. They've been trying to sink this boat for, you know, 5, 6, 7 years. What's that guy's name? Manchin or?
I just don't think it takes that much time to actually look at what how much it costs to get into the other. You know, there would be two things you look at. How much does it cost for us to, if we withdrew, for us to get into other schools? And is it a possibility, or are their waiting lists too big, so we couldn't get our 30 students in? Or what's the likelihood that we could get back into Minuteman without being a member? I think those two things wouldn't take that long to figure out.
Day late and a dollar short.
Yeah, I think they looked at some of those other regional schools, like Neshoba and Assabet, and there's no room at the inn for additional students. They're not taking any students, as far as I know. I may be wrong, but I think they're maxed out. There is no place for these students to go if we cut them loose.
I'd like to take a vote on this tonight, so.
Okay. Anyone disagree? Anyone want to wait? Nope, okay.
I would just want to add that if indeed there's no room at the inn, then how is the Commissioner of Education going to approve this deal when however many students are taken out of Minuteman by these towns and have no place to go? How's he going to do that? Well, if he disapproves the deal, then we're back to square one again.
Unlike, it's something that we've all learned in the district. It's unlike the high school, the public high schools and other public schools. The vocational educational schools don't, if you withdraw from a district, you don't have this obligation to present a plan of what you're going to do with your students, and you don't really have an obligation to find another vocational technical educational home for them. It's unfortunate, obviously, Minuteman and other voc ed schools would like towns to withdraw to make their best effort to find another place for the students who are no longer in the schools. But the other thing I should mention is with regard to any towns that do withdraw, the students that are in the school, up to the time that their withdrawal is effective, can continue and graduate from there. It's just that once the withdrawal is effective, there will be no more new students going to Minuteman. Unless there is space and the school committee agrees that they can be admitted, so.
So just one point of clarification. What we are voting on when we vote is not the building.
No, it's
the
amended regional agreement.
agreement.
It's dated as of, I guess, December 2015 or 2016.
December 10th.
Yeah, the building.
Regional agreement as amended.
Yeah, the building proposal, the financing proposal won't be until later this year.
Excuse me, do we know when the commissioner has to decide whether to accept or reject this deal?
December of this year, December 31st of this year.
So after the funding window is long closed?
But it's not to say that he won't decide before that, but it's.
Okay, so why don't we go ahead and call a vote. I just will say that I'm not going to be voting for it because I just feel like we haven't done our due diligence, and I'm just disappointed that the town is unwilling to sort of look at other alternatives when this is a big agreement that's going to cost us a lot of money. All right, so I will entertain a motion.
I will move not to approve, what is it, Article 1? Approval of the new Minuteman agreement.
Second.
I second that.
Okay, all those in favor of not approving the new agreement, say aye. Aye. Who was that? Okay. Motion fails. All right, I'll entertain another motion.
Madam Chairman, I move that the Finance Committee recommend Article 1 at the special town meeting.
Second.
All those in favor of approving the agreement, the Minuteman agreement, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. I guess it doesn't matter. Okay, so motion passes 5-4.
Thank you.
Wait, is that true? Did everyone vote, or did anyone abstain? No, okay. Did you have something, Jason? Okay. All right, so I guess I would just recommend, we have to decide who's going to speak to that. Are you going to speak to that, Mike? At the town meeting? Since you're and you're also the guy that's been the rep, so just make sure that you include why we opposed.
And I just wanted to thank everybody for their comments. I mean, there are a lot of questions and concerns, and even those of us who kind of support moving forward have some questions that we need cleared up. I mean, it's just, there's a lot, it's a big mess, and it's complicated, and every time I think I have it under, my belt, I discovered that I really don't understand it at all, so, yeah.
If I may ask, if you do get some kind of miraculous whip count of the other 15 towns, I'd love to hear it.
If I get some sort of what count?
Miraculous whip count about how the other towns would vote if some town, if one of the 16 towns rejects this, we're back to needing a district-wide.
Right.
And it would be very good to know.
That was a ballot vote.
Right, but that has impact on, from a strategic perspective, it has a very big impact on how this plays out.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet, for all your time. That was long. Okay. Senior Center, Sharon and Dean, sorry that took so long.
Yeah, okay, no, I don't think that'd be cool. Just saying, sure.
We do not have a PowerPoint presentation. We showed it on Budget Saturday. I know. No worries. And Katie Green suggested that the committee come and meet with the Finance Committee separately just to answer some of the questions that you folks had. So I guess we'll start with that.
So you don't have anything you want to say before? I know you already presented stuff at the Budget
Yes.
Saturday, so that's fine, and then you gave us stuff. So if that's true, then we can go ahead and just start with questions. Folks have questions? Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, I sent these in ahead of time, so
Yeah.
I'll just repeat them for the benefit of those who hadn't seen them. But, do you have the actual, I think in your presentation you may have had this, but I didn't get a chance to write down the information, but the current usage of the existing senior center, what sort of utilization it gets. I think the presentation that the FAQ you had sent around highlighted, the parking lot is generally full, and then could you just talk to, sort of, peak demand of the facility, what days, what times it's generally used, and then what is that peak demand? I mean, is it typically, every day from 10 to 2, or is it 2 days a week, or is it 1 day a month during some special program? Just when you actually see these peaks, and then what the numbers are on that.
Sure. So if you haven't been to the senior center, we really just have 2 rooms. One is a multi-purpose activity room. The other one is a dining room. Last year we serviced 1,191 seniors, and our senior population in Acton right now is 4,400, so we serviced about 27% of the seniors in town. Really fluctuates. We have, depending on the programs, again, because we only have really 1 room to use, we see over 100 people each day. Popular programs are any kind of lifelong learning program that we do. We have college professors come in and do talks, and that's extremely busy. When we do our homemade lunches, those are busy, and then exercise is very popular at the senior center. So we have waiting lists. We have over 15 exercise classes per week, and people come and go. At this point, one of the problems I see at the senior center is there's no limbo, really. There's no place for people to go after a program, we're kind of shoving them out the door, moving the furniture and getting ready for the next program. So our quieter times are later in the afternoons, but we're looking to make some changes. We've added some afternoon exercise classes just to accommodate some of the needs, and people are attending those.
What would you say is peak capacity there? What's the most people it can handle?
What is our building capacity? Is it supposed to be 100?
Okay.
Due to septic or something, right?
I think the sort of limiting capacity that I see, first off, parking area is a real problem, and we can't increase it any more than what we've got right now. We've kind of nibbled away at the edges. We've increased the size of the parking area over the years, but we're at the top of a hill. There's no more room to expand. So I think we can park about 40 cars. So that's a real limiting factor. If they have more popular programs, but people can't get to them because they don't want to walk up to the top of the hill, that discourages the elders, they drive away. Some of in the living room, the one big activity room, they'll have some lectures there, and they can seat about 80 to 90 people, and they have to cut it off right there. So, lecture hall type seating, you're probably looking at 90 to 100. Ideally, they'd like to do some programs like, do a luncheon first and then a lecture afterwards, so you don't have a big influx of new people coming in, because again, the parking is a real problem. But I think, from a practical point of view, I think, about 100 people for a lecture seems to be about right. Looking at the limitations of the present area that's used for exercise, you can exercise probably about 30 people can exercise. So you could be running exercise in one room, and you could have, a dining operation going on in the other room. But it really fluctuates upon, exactly what people are doing. Obviously, if they're sitting in a lecture, they're not taking as much room as doing a Zumba class.
And the meals I try to limit to 50. If we go over that, the dining room really gets a bit too tight.
The location that you're proposing, is that on Arlington Street, is that correct?
Yes.
Have they looked at other locations in town? Because I have neighbors who are getting up there. One of them's retired and in his 60s, and they said where it is now, where you want to put it on Arlington, they said that is an awful location. That was the first thing. I don't like the location myself, because I just don't think it's accessible as it could be, such as if you had maybe, I don't know, in South Acton, but maybe in, like there used to be old Buttons to Bows and that Tables of Teapots. If you ever acquire that building in West Acton Village and put it right in there, you get a whole village. They can walk to other stores. There's other things right around there. Versus you're on Arlington Street, it's not really a main road either. So I think some limitations to the site, and you're basically almost in a residential neighborhood type of thing. And I kind of have a concern with the location too. I could address that. As you're probably aware, this is, well, on my folder here, it says Senior Center 3.0. This is the third time. So we looked at a lot of different options for a location over the years. The first study that was done now about 8 or 9 years ago, I think they looked at about 40 different parcels of land owned by the town to try to find a good location. And came up with a fairly limited number. Acton has about 1,800 acres of conservation land, only about 400 acres of general municipal land. You can't build this on conservation land. By the time you eliminate things like Narrow Park, Morrison Farm, the playgrounds, and town-owned land that already has buildings like Town Hall and Library, you end up with a pretty small footprint of possible sites that you can build on. Further to that, you look at some of the other general municipal land that the town has acquired over the years. A lot of it
acquired by donations or by tax taking. One parcel we looked at outside West Acton Village, actually also on Arlington Street, was donated to the town back in the 1960s because it was considered not buildable by the environmental constraints in the 1960s. So you can imagine, if you look at it, a map, it looks like, gee, that's a great parcel, but when you go out there, it's wet, it's got all kinds of problems with it. So in the initial charge to try to find something that you could build on town-owned land, there were very few parcels that were actually available. And in fact, the Arlington Street parcel we're talking about now was not really available until the new regional school agreement went into effect. And then unquestionably the land became under the control of the town as opposed to the schools. We did look very early on in the process. Sharon and I met with Matthias Rosenfeld to look at a possibility of putting the senior center in that West Acton Village Works building. There's some real constraints to the size of the building. A lot of concerns we had, again, about parking. All the stories you hear about elders driving are all true. That building would have underground parking, and trying to have an 85-year-old drive into an underground parking garage can be pretty trying. If you ever need some entertainment, go up to the senior center about 8:15 in the morning and stand well off to the side and watch the folks showing up for exercise attempting to parallel park. Parking is a severe problem, and that was one of the other problems that we've got with doing things in a village. We were looking at the possibility, if we'd gone with the Village Works proposal, we would have had people having to park behind the West Acton Fire Station and walk. And now we're looking at a quarter-of-a-mile walk for a lot of frail elders. So it sounds like a broken record, but the whole issue of a parking lot and needing that really constrains where you can put this. It'd be ideal to put it in a village someplace, but we don't have that much room in any of the villages. So we've looked at those sites. The Arlington Street site came along. The elephant in the room, of course, I might as well address it, is, why don't you put it on the Walker site that the town is in the process of acquiring, the former Kennedy landscaping site? Couple of factors that has given us a great pause with that site. Number one is traffic access. Traffic situation is pretty tough on Main Street, again, for elders. There was a great deal of the discussion that went on at town meeting, the town justifying the town acquiring that parcel was because it was felt that it would have the daycare center that was proposed would have an adverse effect on traffic on Main Street. It was also said at town meeting that the 20,000 square foot daycare center and 125 car parking lot for a daycare center would be incompatible with the size of that neighborhood. So what we're proposing is a 20,000 square foot senior center and 125 car parking lot. So it seems disingenuous of us to say, well, it's okay if they're little old people as opposed to little young people. So we've looked at that site. It's going to keep on coming up. The other kind of issues that we run into with the Walker site is that it's a strange sort of hourglass-shaped piece of property. If and when the town actually does acquire it, it's going to be challenging developing that. Again, trying to get parking in close proximity to the building. So some of the sketches that came early on, sort of back of the envelope things with the architect, he looked at putting the building kind of close to where the garden center is now and putting the parking down almost down to Route 2. And again, it's everybody wants to get that parking spot that's really close to the building. So we've looked at those sites. We also, of course, in Senior Center 2.0, we proposed putting it up at Narrow Park. A lot of issues with that as far as the perception being that it's too far outside where most people drive in town. And that was a fairly small and constrained site, which became even more constrained with the creation of the Miracle Field. The town ended up doing a land swap, and about half the site that we had thought might be used for a senior center got put under a conservation restriction in perpetuity. So we lost half that land, so we really sort of painted ourselves into a corner on that. As far as the Arlington Street site goes, everywhere you go in town is going to be in a neighborhood. The only place it's not going to be in a neighborhood is if you go into an industrial park like Nagog Park, which is at the far side of town. In previous iterations, we looked at spaces out there, but then again, the perception being that it's too far out of town, and it is. I mean, it's bordering Littleton and Westford. We want to make something as centrally located as possible, so there are no ideal sites, but we think that the Arlington Street site is probably, on balance, the best compromise site we've got.
Mike?
Mike, turn your mic.
Do many seniors utilize like the Council on Aging van or these other transportation options around town? And what percentage would you estimate of the usages through that?
I would say maybe 5% of our seniors use transportation. The folks that come to the senior center are very young, very energetic, very lively. The oldest one is 104. But I think independence to seniors is so vital, something that they really cherish. So even if there is a van, they like to drive themselves. So we do have a portion that no longer drive or choose not to drive anymore, but the majority of the seniors are very active, very independent, and drive themselves. And that's something that we've always been working closely with transportation on. Even with the Arlington Street site, we've kind of planted that seed. Is that something that the fixed route shuttle would be willing to go down? We do still have 2 vans that offer the door-to-door service, which is, appropriate for the majority of seniors that aren't living in elderly housing.
Jason.
Thank you. First, I appreciate your comments about not using the Walker site. I completely agree about the optics of using the Walker site for a 125-car lot for seniors, but not for childcare. I would like to get a little more insight into, you said, I believe, 1,100 seniors were serviced last year with the senior center. Can you shed some light on what qualifies as a served patron? Is that somebody who shows up once a month, somebody who shows up for a recurring class, a single function in a given year? What are the metrics that go behind that statistic?
So for our annual report, these are unduplicated seniors. So it might be somebody that just comes once, somebody that comes every week is still just that counted as that one. And it's both people that come to the senior center and others that are maybe homebound and we service at home.
Do we have, I'm not expecting that we do, but do we have any insight as to the number of hours, man hours of utilization? So if somebody shows up and spends 3 hours there, every single day, that's a good number of hours. So do we, as we try and figure out the cost of this, is it more or less expensive than going to the movies?
Difficult for us to judge that. We do have people that are there 5 days a week, have their coffee there, have their lunch there, stay for an afternoon program, and others that kind of come and go throughout the week.
Thank you.
Again, it's the only thing in town that services just seniors, the 60 to 100 plus, so.
I always thought it was wrong that Nat King Cole stopped wishing people Merry Christmas after '92, but that's beside the point. There was a proposal during the 3 board meeting a couple of weeks back, to organize a holistic capital planning committee to look at all of the town-owned buildings, whether that be safety, municipal, schools, everything. Would this building be able to be referred until that, admittedly still being formed committee, finishes its assessment? Or is there approximate immediate need for that necessitates this coming to the head of the line?
I feel that it's been in line. This first committee started back in 2007, and they were seeing the need then. And we do, the town has a capital plan. I don't think it's the 3-board, and this was something that they targeted that needed to be done. And 2020 also recognized it as a need.
And then lastly, in years past, I believe a suggestion had been made about renting space for a period of time to assess, for lack of a better term, the ROI on the dollar spent per resident served. Can you shed some light as to why that suggestion was not viable and may not be viable now?
And you mean satellite sites? Or
No,
renting?
rather than build a brand-new building, rent something in town that may already be vacant. I realize vacancy rates are going down since we brought that manufacturer in behind the post office, but renting a building and seeing, rather than being locked into a $9 to $12 million bond, be locked in at something for a determinate amount of time, assess whether or not the return on investment is correct, and then move forward.
Sure. That is something that all 3 committees had looked at. We're looking at about $20 a square foot for renting property or leasing a building, and then needing to make the accommodations inside. What we found, Dean and I, have looked at lots of different properties and different commercial sites. Parking is always an issue. And then
One of our earliest iterations, the first time around, we did look very seriously at long-term lease or actually purchasing a part of a building in a condominium sort of arrangement. We were looking specifically at a location down on Piper Road, which is no longer available to us, but considerable amount of upcharge to fit it out to our needs. Parking was a problem. Surprisingly enough, what we found with the first 2 studies is that the senior center was not considered to be a desirable tenant by a lot of landlords, especially if they're in industrial space or commercial space, because we were told by several landlords that they felt that having seniors in upscale commercial space would send the wrong message about the viability of their developed area. So it was a little surprising to me that we were ready to sign a 20-year lease, and we were having a hard time in the first 2 studies finding a dance partner. Of course, all of this would have to go out. It would be an RFP process to assess the market. We'd set up some criteria for how we'd evaluate the space and look at it. We did, in this latest iteration, meet with one commercial developer located in the Kelly's Corner area who had a very preliminary proposal to build a new building for us and lease it to us. But it was sort of pie in the sky. In my opinion, probably the least accessible location you could get to in Kelly's Corner. And we were looking at probably costs of around $400,000 a year for a 20-year lease, and at the end of that, you walk away from the building. So for that reason, we've looked at leasing and rental as an option, but never to the point of actually putting out an RFP and going for it. So you really, in order to put together a viable RFP and really get some serious interest from any landlords out there, you've got to actually have an appropriation, which obviously we don't have. And then the legal issues of how you would structure any kind of a deal with a multi-year agreement that would probably have to be ratified by town meeting, I would expect. So we've looked at it, but maybe not as extensively as some people might like.
Bob?
I sent Sharon my questions already, so presumably she'll have good answers for them. Last time you appeared before us, you wanted $140,000 to do this preliminary study. Now you want $300,000. Why so much more?
Well, assuming, and these are just numbers we've sort of pulled out of the air, but they're probably within the scope of what we're looking at. Assuming a $10 million building, full architectural and engineering design, construction administration, basically the whole A&E package will probably be about, we're assuming about 10%, so about $1 million. The $300,000 that we're looking for will actually advance the design package to a much higher degree than what we had envisioned the first time around with 140. So the total design and A&E cost will still be about 10%. It's just we're sort of front-loading the A&E costs by asking for the $300,000 rather than the $140,000 we asked for last year.
That really sort of answers the second question which I asked Sharon, which was what was the impact of this $300,000 on the total architectural costs? And the suggestion is that it basically substitutes for it as opposed to adds to it. And the last question was, you're going to abandon 5,000 square feet of town space. What's going into the 5,000 square feet? This is particularly addressed, in my mind, to the problem of building roughly 3,500 square feet for offices for veterans and the nursing and the social worker when you're giving up basically 5,000 square feet, which would house them plus somebody else as well. So what does the town propose to do with it?
Well, those kind of decisions would have to be made by the town manager and the Board of Selectmen. I will observe, though, that the charge to the Senior Center Study Committee was to build a senior center. Town manager approached us some months ago, and with his organizational plan of co-locating the nursing service, veteran service officer, and social worker all closely adjacent to the senior center to better serve the entire population, sort of get these people, there can be some cross-training, there can be some support done, as opposed to what we have now where we've got a social worker here, a veteran service officer across the street, nursing service upstairs, and then the help social work people from seniors being down in South Acton. So I would defer to the town manager to talk about his organizational plan, but the senior center could be built without that. The committee has voted that they think it's a good idea. We're in favor of it, but it's not something that that we initiated on our own. Also, if you go through some of the space needs studies that I did pre-retirement using a firm, Allegro Architects, we looked at the problem of the issue of how to reuse the existing senior center. And the plan we came up with was basically take half of it and make it into a social service center. That would be the half that's presently the office and the living room. And the other half, or slightly less than half, that's the dining area, would be available for other community uses. For instance, the recreation department is always looking for indoor space to run their programs. So that is a model that came up with an independent consultant a few years ago. Whether something else might occur, I don't know. Ultimately, say those decisions will be made by the town manager.
I appreciate that, and I'm glad to hear that the people interested in the senior center are not wedded to this, because one of the continuing problems this committee has had is a lot of empty space with buildings that we keep heating and electrifying and do other kinds of things, and nothing ever seems to grow in them, and I would hate to see us grow another one, but thank you.
Others? Doug?
Evening. I think all of us are sensitive to the notion that this is a community that really stretches for its younger population. I mean, we're pretty famous for that. And that we have, if we have 4,400 people in town that are seniors, it's legitimate to ask the question, what are you doing for your seniors if you're doing that much for your kids? And that question sort of hangs over this thing. There's a lot of detail that needs to be worked out to make sense of the answer, but I think that it's at least from my own perspective, I'd be certainly inclined to stretch and try and find a way to make this shoe fit. There are some things that I think, as Bob has mentioned, cloud the issue. And trying to pack in people in office space if you're going to do a senior center and solve a clearly defined need in the community, and you're going to turn it into an office building where there's only 1,100 people that use the center, and yet you're going to take all these people that are serving all 4,400 and put them in the senior center. I understand the desire to rationalize office space distributions, but to try and cram it into the senior center strikes me as hitchhiking. Okay, and I don't think that's appropriate. The thing about the existing center that has always bothered me a little bit is that why can't we expand the parking lot? For example, what's wrong with the building that we can't expand the parking lot?
Well, the problem is that we've expanded. If you ever go up there and walk to the edge of the parking lot and look over the edge of the berm, there's about a 30-foot drop on 3 sides. On the 4th side, which you pass on your left-hand side as you approach the building, there is a little plateau there which could be expanded into parking. We had some sketches done by Bruce Stamsky when he was Public Works Director. The problem is not to provide the access to get into that area, you end up eliminating some existing parking spaces. So you would net out by probably adding about 6 additional spaces net. And then you've just faced with a drop-off, say 25 to 30 feet. I don't know how many of you folks were here when that center was built and Audubon Drive was built, but there was a real problem with stabilizing that hillside because it's a clay drumlin, and it kept washing and slipping down and actually blocked Audubon Drive once or twice near its entrance onto High Street. So what we've got up there is stable, but you really can't go any further. There's not really any effective way to build retaining walls. Even if you were to put stacked CMU retaining walls all the way around it like you see for the approach into the new Cabela's building down there in Hudson, 40 feet high. What's happened is you can't go out that much further before you've actually gone beyond the footprint of the lease area of the property. So it's a small site. It's up at the top of a hill. You could get maybe 6 more parking spaces. That's it.
I've had buildings that had pilings that went down in 252 feet. So I mean, I'm aware of solutions where you can get real aggressive and make things happen. And if you have a piggy bank of $9 million, you can get awful aggressive about creating parking to preserve the use of a 20,000-foot building you pay $1 a year for. So I think that. I mean, I hear that it can't be done, but I would rather have somebody say, okay, here's an independent engineer, and this is what he said you'd have to do, and we submitted to the public market to determine what the cost would be, and here's what came back, And at that point, you know, do you want to give up your $1 a year building to save that money when you're going to spend a fortune to do a new building someplace else? And so those are choices that don't seem to be clear to me in terms of the existing building. But I think as some people know, I was the one who suggested the town ought to buy Strawberry Hill and turn that thing into the extended town offices and senior center and community center, all of which could have been accommodated in that building. The cost, as I understand it, was $460 a foot to build.
That's the projected cost. And to go back to your earlier point, we did do a more extensive analysis of expanding on the existing site. That was done during 1.0, about 2007. In addition to the parking problems, we also have limitations on septic. We'd probably end up having to tie into town sewers. And you can expand the parking, but then you still need to expand the building itself. Building itself would not accommodate a second floor the way it's constructed right now. We looked at ways of adding things on, so a lot of that work was done, and when we did the study in 2007, in addition to the lease option, we looked at Piper Road. We also looked at expansion on the existing site, and we think we pretty well exhausted that. As far as the square footage cost, dealing with the architect we have right now, and this architect is on board for a feasibility study only, we're looking at in the neighborhood of $450 to $500 per square foot based on similar public construction recently accomplished in Massachusetts. I did have a meeting with another commercial developer who was telling me recently that they opened some bids on a fire station somewhere in Massachusetts, and the low bid came in at $670 a square foot.
How big was the footprint?
I don't have that level of detail, but it's...
There's no economies of scale when you get down to a 4,000-foot, fire station,
So we, based on the information we've gotten from our architect, who does these kind of projects routinely, and in fact, they're in the bidding process right now for a new town hall for the town of Foxborough. We're looking at around $500 a square foot.
I don't advocate building a new building. I advocate buying an existing building and retrofitting it. If it's true that you cannot build a Mississippi cofferdam and provide enough land, create enough footage of land to build additional parking, and if the existing building cannot be expanded, okay, then we have to accept that. But to go out and scratch build a new building, when we've been going through this period where there's been lots of buildings around. I mean, we just saw the AES building, which is 70,000 feet, get sold, and they sold it for $2.5 million. So, you take your 25 or 30,000 feet out of that for the senior center, and as much as you want for a community center, if that's a hot potato, and rent the rest of it in the public market. Your cost of retrofitting a factory building to be a senior center wouldn't be $500 a foot, So let me just put the brakes on just for a second. I want to ask one question. There was a chairman of the Board of Selectmen at one point who absolutely insisted that an indispensable feature of the senior center was to have a full-scale restaurant kitchen. And I tried to explain to her that restaurant kitchens are unbelievably expensive, with all the power, and with all the ventilation, and all the other code requirements, fire suppression and so on, that go into building a commercial kitchen. And that in a facility that's only 20,000 feet, that didn't make any sense. And she just absolutely, that's the way it's got to be. We can't be warming up food anymore. We've got to cook it on site. I understand having some limited cooking facilities on site, but to have a full-scale kitchen like that, and she wouldn't back off on the subject. What kind of kitchen facilities are proposed, and are they in the $460?
It is a commercial kitchen. That's what we have now.
You have a warming setup, right? With new
Excuse me?
cabinet. You have a warming setup with new tiles and cabinets, right?
We have that as well, but we do have a commercial kitchen that was, I had come before you 2 years ago to upgrade our kitchen.
Oh,
Some
this-
of the appliances we had were commercial grade when we started. It's huge. Meals at the senior center are such a draw. It's such a normal way to socialize. We see a huge difference. We do lunches there 5 days a week. Most of them are provided by Minuteman Senior Services, which are the warmings. So they come in a little cardboard carton. They were probably packaged at 5 o'clock in the morning, brought out from Lancaster. We see maybe 10 to 15 people that will come have lunch there. When we do the home cooked, we're at the 50. For some of these folks, this is their only meal of the day. You know, they can go home and have their cereal, but they live alone, or, you know, they're not going to cook for two. So nutritionally, it has its value. Socially, it has its value. It's something I really feel strongly about, and I think for anybody that's witnessed a meal at the senior center could back me and support me on that.
I'm not by any stretch of the imagination opposed to serving food there. Yeah. But the kitchen that was in the plan that was discussed some time ago was for a building that small, was just, to my mind, something that no tenant I've ever had would ever do that. So my recommendation is that we buy a building on the market that has adequate space and adequate parking, and figure on retrofitting it. If you can find it on a lease basis, so much the better. You can use it for, say, 10 to 20 years. You can have your lease built with lots of flexibility so that you have outs at the 10-year mark, the 15-year mark, the 20, and you have the right to extend the lease if you want to do so. You can buy all kinds of flexibility, and then as your program matures, and as we reach a stabilized number of seniors in town, it might be more appropriate at that time to make a long-term commitment and buy something that then would, day one, become a constraint. So but again, go back to the first remark I made in the very beginning, which is it's long overdue for us to do something for our seniors, and we should do it right. But some of these numbers are just terrifying, frankly. Thank you.
Steve?
Yeah, of those 4,400 seniors, I take it you're defining people as seniors who are over 60. Roughly, how's that 44 break out by decade? I mean, how many are in the 60s, 70s? Obviously, it goes all the way up to how many people are in their hundreds. But how does that break out?
I have one of Peter Ashton's graphs here somewhere.
Peter would be in his 60s.
It is amazing. All right, so I can hand this around. I apologize. So right now, it was in color, and I didn't print it in color. I apologize. Looks like our largest group, I know. Sorry, I didn't bring it in color. I can email that to you if you like, if I can't find it today.
What's the color like, Frank?
Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. So the majority of seniors in 2015 are the 60 to 64 range. The next is the 65 to 69.
So how many out of the total is that? What percent?
Let's see. So I would say probably 30%. I can hand this around,
Okay.
sorry.
All right, so those are the baby boomers, okay. Of the 1,100 people that you service, where do they fall in the age range?
The majority, I would say, are between 75 and 85, but again, we have the newly retired that don't know what to do with themselves or are looking to give back to the community. And our oldest comes with her daughter, and she's 104, so we really have that huge span. Amazing.
Okay. Thank you. I would echo some of the other comments that if we want a senior center and we don't want a community center, then we don't want an office building and a senior center. Let's try and get this thing confined to what it's supposed to be. There's nothing in particular about nursing, social work, or veterans that says that only applies to seniors. Those are services that should be open to the entire town.
Anything else? Oh, Brandon, do you want to make a comment?
Hi, Franny Hosman. I have a question I've wanted to ask the Finance Committee, because I don't understand from the history of the way we do things. And so I was sort of curious with some of your experience, what you say. Sometimes I feel that it was the site that ties us up, that caused us, like especially, my opinion is that it was the site that really messed us up in the 2011. What was the most recent vote? What year?
2012?
2012. Well, anyway, the last one with the Nara Park. I know there were other things that came into play, but I feel that was part of it. And so, as we talk about the Arlington Street site, and the committee decided the other day to look over the next 6 weeks at the Walker Street to put that to rest or to pursue it, to just look at it again, because some people do have questions about the Arlington Street site, and there were a lot of environmental concerns about the Arlington Street site too. So my fear is that site questions would make it not pass again at town meeting. My question is, have we ever voted on a building, on a plan, like we want a senior center, without tying it to the site, having maybe 2 possible sites or something, and then after that vote, during the year that we prepare to go for construction money, have a subcommittee settle on a site and pursue the design based on that site. So that was my question.
I don't think we have, Franny, is to my knowledge.
What would be the...
Bob is probably the one that's been...
Franny, I don't think we have ever gone to town meeting to build any building in town that didn't have a piece of land attached to the building at the time. And I hesitate to think what would happen if you tried something like that.
My thought was that there are people that we might be able to get some consensus that we do want a senior center, and then work out the details. But you don't think, why, Bob, can you explain exactly why you think it wouldn't work?
When you go to town meeting, you need specificity. Are you going to buy a tractor of this size or a tractor of that size? Not do you want to buy a tractor, and then we'll decide sometime later with another committee as to which size tractor we want, which reminds me of the hour we once spent at town meeting debating the size of tractors, but that's a long time ago. But you just need to have some degree of specificity. People want a senior center. Yes, they didn't want a senior center in Nara because it was too far away. I'm not quite sure what the problem with Arlington is, because it's about as center of the town as you can get, and it doesn't require you, if you don't want to drive on the main roads, but that it may be for some people. But you just can't. That's part of the problem with this whole business about a community center. Yes, a community center, but nobody's ever come up with a program for it. Nobody knows who would run it, what it would do, and so it just sits out there as an amorphous thing. And I think that's what you would get if you said, we want to build a senior center, but we're not quite sure where we'll build it. Well, if you build it over here, it's going to cost $4 million, but if you build it over there, it's going to cost $10 million, because you got to blast out 20 tons of rock. It's just not I don't think it's a good idea to think in those terms.
Well, what I was thinking was that we create this schematic drawing, and then we go out and we put out an RFP, and we get an architect, which may or may not be the same architect, and it might be totally different. So really what the people are voting on at town meeting is a certain size senior center with a certain amount for design funds. But at that point, we haven't figured out how much we're going to have to blast or the details of a specific site, of that specific site. So that's why, so it's not like going for a tractor. We know the size tractor we want, we just don't know where the garage is.
So I'm thinking we should probably move on from this issue. Did you have a quick question, Dave?
I have two more.
I just had one more quick question is, in the FAQ, you documented that the human services portion was about 1.5 million of the 8 to $10 million cost. Is it possible just to get like a frame of reference on that? Because, as we've talked about in Finance Committee, I'm relatively new, but it's difficult often to have context and like what are the other options out there. And so this project right now is just sort of presented as it is, standalone, and here's the option that's presented. And so just one thought would be is, that's one option, is subtracting out the $1.5 million, and then that brings the cost down. But that still doesn't give like me or the town, I think for any matter, any context on like what are the options available to the town. I mean, so I just use it as an example. What if you duplicated the existing 5,000 square foot facility on Arlington Drive? Like, just hypothetically, what would that cost be? And it's really just sort of a back of the envelope estimate of it, not necessarily, an architecture firm or anybody needs to weigh in on it, but it does give us some idea of, okay, well, this would cost $2 million to have exactly what we have, but with more parking, or $5 million or whatever. But then ultimately the town could have options to say, oh, here's a $3 million, a $5 million, and a $10 million option, and this one looks good enough, and the cost is reasonable enough, instead of here's the $9 or $10 million option or whatever it is. Just some thought is how I generally look at these. Is this right now is being presented as the only option, and are there alternatives, perhaps stripped down alternatives?
Well, I think and sorry that we didn't bring in a PowerPoint, but if you take a look at the existing plan, and this is just one plan from a feasibility point of view, but the building that we've got sketched out there has two wings, and one wing is the senior center, and most of the other wing is that human services section. So it would be fairly easy and straightforward to lop a big piece of that off. And if human services, for instance, is using 5,000 square feet, 5,000 times $500 a square foot, I think would kind of get you a sense of what you would be looking at. So I think the way the building is designed right now, that kind of modification would be fairly easy if you wanted to go that route.
Okay, so I'll just say something briefly, which is that I also agree with Doug. I do think something is needed for the seniors, and way back when I was doing the Acton 2020 plan, I think we want to create ways to retain seniors in our town. And so I'm very much in support of giving, and I agree that the existing one is not particularly adequate. I am disappointed, as you probably know, that we did not include a community element. I actually think politically that would have been a way to make the project more viable, which maybe it'll be fine at town meeting, I don't know, but it's sort of like we're adding on these other things in there for office space, but we're unwilling to add the community center piece, and it's felt to me like it's been this almost territorial, we just don't want any, kids around us sort of thing, and I just think it's unfortunate, because I think intergenerational interaction is wonderful and beautiful, and anyway, so that's just my little soapbox on that, but I think it's unfortunate, and I hope that maybe somehow that this senior center will be modular enough that if we decided that we wanted to add on that component in the future, we could do that. I know Marge Kennedy came before the committee and wanted to propose that, and it just wasn't accepted. So anyway, and then just one suggestion just to kind of keep in your back pocket, given if this goes through, is that, I wonder if there's a way to have a public-private financing for this. A lot of other towns actually, have community centers, senior centers, they're named after someone because somebody made a huge donation, and maybe we don't have that kind of person in Acton, but maybe we have, a certain amount of individuals that would want to participate in helping with this and, making their mark in Acton. I just think it could be a good model to think about, because, it will obviously be a big capital cost. What happened? Oh.
I didn't want to interrupt her. I have a couple more questions.
So anyway, so that was what I wanted to say. So I guess Jason, we can take your question. I mean, I guess the only thing is it's almost 10, and I did want to get to this issue of reserves because we have an ALG meeting on Thursday, and I really wanted to reach consensus on what we wanted to do about that. But I'm feeling like I don't want to be here till 10:30. But Jason, if you have this really quick questions you want to
I'll try
ask.
and keep this very brief since I did have a bite at the apple already. Have you polled the seniors who are not already using the current center as to why they are not using it? I understand you have pent-up demand in the classes you already have planned, but 3/4 of the target population aren't using it. Do we know why?
We had done surveys in the past. Sometimes it was they were still working, or it's that stigma, it's for old people. To me, the biggest thing is getting people through the front door, so finding creative ways to get people to come to the center, because then they realize it's not people on walkers playing bingo all day. It's really a vibrant community.
I wanted to follow up with that, and I'll take this offline. I do want to talk to my colleagues about why the need for this to be seniors only. To that same point of view, if the stigma is it's an old person's only place, and then you explicitly say it has to be an old person's place, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then the last corollary to this, and then I will shut up on the topic. You said it will be available to the general population after 4 o'clock. Do you have proposed programming in place to occupy the full time, the full amount of hours to occupy that building? And if not, is there a mechanism for other groups to be able to use that space, or will that space go fallow strictly because of an age limit?
That's up for discussion. Part of the
Isn't
community...
that a community center?
Well, part of the community center piece, where people couldn't really tell us what a community center was or who would run it. So, that's a much bigger discussion.
Very well.
Dave did ask that I hand or email the other presentation that's going around, so I'll email that to folks, the PowerPoint that we did at one of the forums. And then I also handed out a strategic plan that we had, so thank you for taking time.
Thanks for coming in. Oh, boy, Dave has something.
Just to the Finance Committee, so I may be missing something, but it looks like you mentioned Kelly's Corner, plus the Senior Center, plus the rail trail is, in theory, that we'd be asking the town for $1.2 million for just design plans for this coming year. As it does start to seem like a pretty large number after a while for just design. Just FYI.
Back to my original comment about making this part of the overarching capital planning committee.
Which we already voted on, by the way, right? The minutes I handed out tonight. I mean, we've already decided that CapEx needs to be part of a plan.
Okay, so I was really hoping to be out of here by 10, but that's in like 1 minute. So I guess, we have, where is that? The thing that I sent you from Steve Barrett. Mostly, I was just trying to get a sense of, how much are we kicking off every year and why. The why isn't exactly in here. But I followed up with Brian, and Brian just said there's, it's because I was wondering if it was all turnbacks. It's turnbacks, but it's also some one-time, what were the one-time things, Brian? So it's turnbacks, sometimes an increase or unexpected increase in revenue, and then there was some one-time things.
Yeah, there's a section on the tax recap when we submit this documentation to the State Department of Revenue under local receipts, and at the bottom of it are non-recurring revenues. And some of those non-recurring revenues, Margaret, as I had touched on, are some of the tax title payoffs. So if you had somebody that's been in tax title for a significant amount of time and they pay it off, it goes in that particular column. DOR does not allow you to use that as a regular revenue source because, frankly, you don't know when they're going to pay off. We're assuming that you're going to get a little bit of that every year. And to touch on to the degree of how much of that impacts this, in one particular year, probably going back 5 or 6 years now, I would have to research it, and I know you had sent a follow-up email. We had about $650,000 in tax title payoffs that we didn't account for, and that would go right to the bottom line and help to reestablish that free cash position. So it's things like that. That was, in that particular year, I think it was just 3 large accounts in town that were delinquent that happened to all pay off in that same year. So we realize it when we get that payoff. You know, something to be mindful of is, you know, the mortgage company now is, you know, they're receiving our data, and I think I'd mentioned this before, they're receiving our information in electronic format, which they never received before. So now they have the ability to scan our data files and find out whose mortgages are out there, where they're delinquent and back taxes. And when they find those files, they try to, you know, approach those taxpayers and find out why they're delinquent and negotiate some kind of a deal with them or some kind of arrangement, or they force them to get them to pay that, or they pay on their behalf and then they escrow that. So we're finding a lot of that happening too, more currently than we have in the past. But I think right now, you know, the key is you know, some of that, you know, rises to the top, some of that cream, and, you know, and that's where you get those significant payoffs. But those are the non-recurring one-time events that happen from time to time.
So I would love to dig deeper into this spreadsheet because I still have a lot of questions, but I don't think we have time tonight. But I guess I would just make the observation that we seem to be adding pretty heftily to the reserves, even though we have put aside reserve use in the warrant. We just haven't used that at all, and in fact have added to it. Is that a correct statement? For the most part, there's a couple of years where there's a negative.
Yeah, I think what happens if you look at that spreadsheet, you're going to find that, you know, even though the ALG plan calls for a certain amount of reserve use, you know, when the dust settles in the subsequent year, you know, because of our ability to, you know, maybe, you know, have some kind of a turn back, maybe because we're conservative in spending or things happen during the course of the year, but also have those non-recurring, you know, revenues that come in that you can't account for because the Department of Revenue does not allow you to do that. And frankly, and maybe some of our, you know, estimates in some of that revenue was conservative, and so those revenue projections are coming in stronger than what we anticipate. One thing to keep in mind, and I think it's important that folks understand this, is that when you do tax to the full extent of Prop 2.5, it doesn't give you a lot of room for error. And what I mean by that is we have to have a balanced tax recap when we go into December and we set the tax rate. So you got to be pretty sure, and remember, these numbers, we're talking about this now. This isn't going to happen until next December. So when you're putting these revenue projections together, you got to be very careful if you're taxing to the full extent of 2.5, because if one of these revenue projections does not come in where you anticipate, you're upside down. You have a balancing problem, and then your tax recap's going to be out of balance. So two things are going to have to happen. One, you won't be able to set the tax rate. You're going to have to delay it. You're going to have to call a special town meeting and get further appropriation, or you know, or come up with another solution or another revenue source. So it kind of puts you in a really tough position. So
you can't actually use your reserves in that situation?
So you could, but you'd have to call a town meeting and call a special town meeting and use reserves to plug that hole. So you just got to be careful. So you have a tendency to be a little more conservative in those other revenue sources, especially the local receipts, because that's where, you don't want to get beaten there, is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. So you have a tendency to be conservative, and that's where sometimes those local receipts come in a little stronger than what you show in our planning documents.
Yeah, and I think it's a good problem to have, but I do think it means, as we've discussed before, that we are overtaxing to some degree. I mean, if we know that we really are going to have a certain amount of turnbacks plus these other things that come in, you know, every year, we don't have to budget so that we're right on the cusp, but we can budget a little bit less, I guess. But the point of all this is, what we have to decide tonight is the decision about how we want, if we'd rather not use the unused tax levy that's currently in the budget, or not use the reserves. And I would say that I would rather use the reserves, because we have so many reserves right now, and I would rather refund, basically, by not using the unused tax levy, we would be able to, that's essentially proxy for refunding some of those reserves back to the taxpayer. Now, I know we haven't agreed on the actual amount yet, which I'm also happy to take feedback on, but I want to just do that. So I think if we could all maybe express a very quick opinion on that. I know some of you did last time, just on that issue, using reserves versus using the unused tax levy. And then, I don't know, Mike, should we talk about just in general the tax rate and the budgets now that we've been through Budget Saturday?
It's probably a good idea. Yeah, sure.
Because we're not going to meet again and before the next ALG. The next ALG meeting is actually the morning of our next Finance Committee meeting. So, quick opinions. Dave, do you have a thought? I'm going to start, I'm just going to go around. I'm just going to do a little tally here.
Admittedly, I didn't follow that entire conversation. I will just, I'm looking at the new ALG plan and then the fiscal 17 projections, and this is the one that has the tax rate going from 19.23 to 20.10, and then the single-family tax bill going up by 5.6%. I don't disagree with returning money to taxpayers, certainly in principle, but I would say I think we should probably keep an eye on, the next couple of years where these numbers, particularly the school assessment, does go up, I think, 5% a year for the next 3 years. And so there is a lot more demands on that side, and just generally speaking, I think we'd want to get a better handle on the expense side of the ledger before talking about that, but that's kind of a high level, just...
Well, if we want to do that, we can do that. I mean, we can certainly say that, you know what, we don't have an answer because we're not comfortable yet with the expenses, right? And we can do that, and that's fine, and I'm happy to take, I think Mike and I would be happy to take that message back.
Did you get an answer on what the reserve balance is?
No. Steve gave me this sheet, which does not have the FY15.
Steve gave you the sheet he gave me last year.
Right.
So.
I think he may have been rushed or whatever. I don't know what happened, but it would be good to know. It would be good to know. So are people comfortable with holding off on this decision until we kind of get to a better budget that we're comfortable with? Yes, no, maybe so.
It would also be comfortable to know what our reserve balance actually is before we make a decision on something. I mean, if our reserve balance shrinks versus grows, if it grows and it was up over last year, then we should be using the reserves instead of going into using the unused tax levy. That said, if it goes the other way, then that brings up another question. How much, if it shrunk, how much did it shrink by?
Right.
That type
I
of thing.
did really want those FY15 numbers.
And not having that number puts us at a disadvantage to make a recommendation.
Yeah, I agree.
We don't have all the information.
I agree. Okay, are people comfortable then on holding on that? Is everyone okay with that? Okay. Anyone want to make a comment? Doug?
There's a couple things that are sort of floating around. I mean, the reserves are probably, what, 10, 11 at this point? Or no, wait a minute, with the land back, okay? So we took $2 million out to buy the
I've heard
Walker
number
property.
7 thrown around by the school committee.
After the Walker, before
I'm
Walker?
assuming after. I hope it's after.
Okay, I mean, there's a big number clunking around out there, and that's why I just want to get pinned down. I think that if that's the case, then it seems that the Walker land becomes real important, because if they insist on keeping that asset and don't have a vigorous program to get the thing sold and off our backs, then we're looking at an increase in taxes, either in the form of an increase in taxes or in unused levy capacity to make up for it, right? Because it's cash. They got used to buy land with no particular plan in mind, which is an illustration of why I think having lots of reserves is dangerous, because people start saying, hey, let's go buy something, let's spend it, and, no sweat, we got 10 million. We'll spend 2 on this, We've already agreed as a committee that we took a vote on it, and we agreed that probably 5%, which was the state recommendation, is the appropriate level for reserves. So if we have, 7 million, we're coming down on that number. But if we have 9 million with the Walker property sold, we've got some elbow room. So I think that it should be, we should make an urgent recommendation at the ALG meeting to the effect that you're sitting on a number which is half of our elbow room, right? You got 2 million in Walker and 2 million to get you from 7 to 5.
And I would like to just say that I really would like it to be clear that the 5% reserves should be an inviolable bottom. It should not be a target that we strive for. It should be an inviolable bottom.
Well, there are going to be times when you spend into your reserves, but you're going to be putting the money back real quick. What we got here is a situation where we took the money and we spent it on something without a plan for what we were going to do.
I'm not disagreeing with your desire to get the Walker property back off our books and to backfill into reserves from it. It is clear to everyone on this committee that we have a major capital expense coming in the near future. Doing anything to risk AAA rating by dipping into our reserves, rating our reserves, would be short-term gain and long-term foolish.
Look, how about we have $50 million in reserves? We're going to spend $100 million on capital, right? That's a nice round number, 50 million. Then you could keep your bond rating, you know. Like the question is, you know, is how many of these bananas do you need on the bunch? That's really what we're looking at. All right, and you can take the logic of this thing and stretch it out pretty quickly by saying, how about a huge number for reserves? Then we could just eat all these capital expenses. We'd never even feel it. And then you'd have, you know, we'd be taxing people like mad to get the reserves up to some large number. The 5% number is supposed to be our safety margin. That's supposed to make sure that no matter how much we screw up, we're going to have $5 million or that percentage.
So you'd agree with an inviolable
I think that there are times when you're going to want to back down into it, and it's okay, but you need to have a plan on how you're going to get back out. In this case, and what I'm trying to make clear is that we spent $2 million, which is, you know, the better part of half of that 5%, to put it in perspective, on something we have no plan for getting the money back on.
Don't disagree with you.
I mean, you know, if we're going to have our money in land, well, we should buy diamonds and, you know, oil wells, and we should diversify our portfolio of investments, you know. Gold, let's buy gold, you know.
All right, so I really want to get out of here. I think other people do too. I guess, you know, so we'll hold on this discussion about the reserves until we have a little bit more detailed information. It's just unfortunate because, like I said, we will be meeting again, and I mean, we just don't have that many more meetings left. But does anyone want to make a quick comment on the pressure that we should continue to be applying to the overall budget when you put the school assessment and the town budget? You know, do we want to continue to sort of stick to our ALG, or not our point of view, which is, you know, 3% increase? People, you know, after having sat through the budget Saturdays and all of that. Bob?
Since we've taken a position on the Minuteman School, you do have roughly an hour between 6 and 7 on February 2nd when we could have a meeting and we could talk about exactly these questions that you've raised this evening before your ALG meeting, and that would allow us to go home before we fall asleep driving there.
Bingo. That's good. Yeah.
I will add that Bob made an eloquent pitch to the school committee to make the point that 5% assessments were not a good idea in the long run. They really should make every effort to get it down to 4. I can't report that it was well received, but he did make the point, and I agree with him. For those of you who weren't at School Budget Saturday, the assessment is roughly 5%. Again.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to all those regionalization savings, but anyway, so why don't we go ahead and do this? For the meeting on Thursday, if everyone agrees with this, for the meeting on this Thursday, we will simply say that, you know, we feel like these budgets are, you know, too high. We won't give a certain number, but we will point out that the point of view did recommend 3%.
And may we please have the final reserves number?
And then I will also email Steve again, and Brian, perhaps you can add your weight to that as well, so we have that. And then if Mike's okay with that, we'll have a meeting on town meeting night. We can discuss hopefully the reserve issue and the tax rate issue, or just the general increase, so that we can be prepared for the February 9th morning meeting, ALG morning meeting. Does that sound like a plan?
I would just add 2 points. One, you need to know the actual reserves that are available. And 2, you need an estimate of how FY16 is going. Because right now we're showing we're going to use 2.6 million. So if it is 7 and we use 2.6, well, folks, we're at our 5% threshold and there is nothing available for FY17. So you need to know those 2 things. What do we really have? And how's this year going? Are we going to use all 2.6 million that was budgeted?
Brian, you're going to be at ALG, right? Yeah, so if we can really get this number, I think it's really important.
Yeah, what I can tell you right now is our free cash, the general fund was certified at like just under $7.7 million. We still have the stabilization monies, about $2 million. I will tell you right now that there is a closing scheduled on the Walker property for this Friday. So presumably that $2 million is going away. So the net position is, you're back at that $7.6 million.
To your knowledge, has the town hired a broker or to sell the land, or to advise us on what could be put on the land, and what it ought to sell for, how long it would take to sell it, all that kind of stuff? Or are we completely ignorant on this subject? I mean, what's being done?
I honestly couldn't tell you, Doug. I haven't been part of that conversation. I don't know if Janet has any more to offer on that or not, but I can certainly, bring that back to,
Oh, gosh.
I was paying attention, no. As far as I know, there's been nothing, because we hadn't had a discussion about anything, and I think that the idea was we would take care of this, and then we would develop a plan for having discussions about what to do with the land. Yeah, I mean, it's true, we don't have a plan for the land. There are a lot of people who think they have plans for the land, but they're not official plans of the Board of Selectmen. I don't know if people on my own board or what their inclinations are. I mean, I'd kind of like to see some revenue coming out of the property, but I don't know what that would entail and how feasible that is, given all the different divergent interests, so.
Given that this land represents 50% of the delta that we're talking about, it's a pretty important chunk of money. I mean, I won't speak for my colleagues, but my recommendation to you would be that you should apply some shoe leather to the soft spots and get this land lined up for sale. Otherwise, you're going to have the most expensive land that has ever been purchased in the history of this town at $500,000 an acre odd, going to some municipal use? I mean, nobody agreed to take $2 million out of reserves and buy a site for a senior center. And certainly there are people who would have really just vigorously opposed any such thing. So, we bought the land to control our destiny so that we could make sure something happened on it that was good for the town, not to be used by the town, to be consumed by the town. Now that the number, because things are shrinking, now that the number has become really large, you at least need to be aware of how long it would take to sell, what steps you need to take to make it saleable. Are there obstacles in place that need to be investigated, like historic sites or something like that? Is it from a topography standpoint, is it all legal and ready to be turned into something? I gather we bought Walker's engineering materials, but has anybody investigated that to find out whether or not indeed the land is ready to be built on and in fact can be sold promptly to somebody who would do something with it promptly and get it back on our tax rolls?
Yeah, we have not, the board has not had any discussion. I haven't been privy to any discussions that might have been occurring about that sort of thing. I mean, I expect that with the closing happening that there will be discussions and, just.
It's 50% of our cash above the 5%.
Yep. I understand. Yeah, I agree. And it would, I'm not going to speak for my board, but I would like to see, it would be nice to see some sort of project that would have some revenue generating function. I mean, maybe collaborate with somebody and sort of have it developed and sort of become a showpiece of Kelly's Corner somehow.
And getting our $2 million back while we're at it.
Well, yeah, do something so that, yeah. Because the idea was to sort of, we're kind of trying, well, it was really to settle a dispute that was impossible. And unfortunately, it wasn't the ideal it wasn't the ideal solution. But I mean, that was what we did because the alternative was continue probably to fight until we were all dead. And we didn't want to do that. So, but yeah. It's, and there have been people talking about potential usages long before any of the Board of Selectmen have talked about it. We really haven't had official discussions about what to do with that property, but we've certainly heard lots of people with ideas, and yeah, we need to focus on it. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will entertain a motion to,
Hold on a second. We need to schedule a meeting for CPC to come and present to us before town meeting, so.
Not before this,
I mean,
before
Before the warrant goes out for April.
for the
town meeting.
April town meeting.
Right, so Peter Ashton would like to come in the beginning of March, from what I believe.
Well, we can, we could probably schedule them for the meeting, our meeting after STM, whatever that date is.
February 9th.
February 9th? Let me see if you can make that. I'll ask him that.
Dave?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye.